And I'll give this to you. Good evening, everyone. Oh, please, thank you. Well, thank you all so much for cramming in and coming into our Third on Third event tonight. You may have noticed this is a little different space than we usually have, so thank you very much for your flexibility. We're working through a power issue upstairs, so we've adapted and are using this space. Before we begin today, I would like to ask everyone to please silence or turn off your cell phone so we have no interruptions while our presenters are speaking today. Now, before I introduce our presenters today, I do have a few announcements about upcoming events coming here at the museum. So, our March Brown Bag Lunch will be the third in our year-long series covering the history of Fernandina in chronological order. This presentation will cover the Spanish period, a period full of mission work, of colonization, and of an explosion of local diversity. This story will be told by our longtime docent, Kathy Adams, and if you're interested, I encourage you to join us on March 6th at noon to learn more about the Spanish period of Amelia Island's history. Now, before it closes on March 6th, I ask everyone, if you want to, please go see our temporary exhibit about Steve Lineberg. It will be closing on the 6th in preparation for the opening of our newest temporary exhibit on March 15th. On March 15th, our newest exhibit will open. It was crafted entirely by our Fernandina High School students and addresses the influential position of Fernandina in the history of Black and female voting rights in Florida. Joining us at the opening will be Dr. Robert Casanello, who just published a book about voting rights history in Jacksonville and Fernandina, and is excited to share that history with you all. So if you'd like to come to our opening event, I invite you all to please join us on March 15th at 6 p.m. to see the new exhibit. Now, I have the honor today of introducing our speakers for tonight. First, Adrienne Burke is a planner and an attorney with a passion for working with communities to tell and preserve their histories. Her partner, Ennis Davis, is a planner and public historian dedicated to inclusively uplifting communities and protecting their culture, heritage, and sense of place. Together, they're the team behind the Community Planning Collaborative, which has been working with the American Beach community over the past year to develop a plan for the restoration of Evans Rendezvous. Now tonight, we'll be hearing more about those plans. So please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay, perfect. Just if I taper down, just let me know to pick up the volume. It's really nice to see you all this evening. I'm Adrienne Burke. We're going to get into a little bit more introductions because we have a couple of other speakers who have joined us tonight that we're very glad to have here. So let me see here. Yep, I'll just talk a little bit about a roadmap for the evening. We'll go through those introductions so you'll get to know each of us a little bit better. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of American Beach and Evans Rendezvous. We'll discuss the work that's been done over the past several months with the community around Evans Rendezvous. We'll talk about some conceptual plans that were developed with the community's input, next steps, and then we also are going to talk a little bit about the role of the American Beach Property Owners Association. So we'll get started with introductions, and if I can ask Elizabeth and Janyce want to come in too. Very quickly, Jared gave a good introduction of who I am, but I know some of you may remember I worked with the city of Fernandina Beach for 8 years in the planning department, so it's nice to see some of you again that I worked with there. I also worked with the Nassau County Planning Department. I'm down in Jacksonville now, but I'm an urban planner by trade, and my specialty is in historic preservation. And Ennis, do you want to say who you are?
So my name is Ennis Davis. I am a sixth-generation Floridian. My background is in architecture, real estate development, and urban planning, and I guess preservation these days. I'm also the co-founder of Community Planning Collaborative with Adrienne, and we work around this intersection of combining cultural heritage and preservation with public policy in a way that allows for communities to gentrify or revitalize from within.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Backe. I'm the Nassau County Planning Director, and I started in late July. I'm a Tampa St. Pete native. Worked there for many years in the planning department and have a background in urban and regional planning, including environmental planning. I did want to mention that we do have an effort, and I gave Jared the brochures, so he has some postcards he can hand out later. We're undergoing a Vision 2050 planning process, and that is about an 18-month process. We had a kickoff event at Wildlight on January 13th, but we're trying to seek a great amount of public engagement, greater than the last time the vision plan was produced back in 2007. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions about it, I can certainly answer them after the presentation. Thank you.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. I am a retired attorney, so it's a great place to be. My husband and I bought land at American Beach 23 years ago to build our retirement home, and we built it in 2020. And so we are grand residents of American Beach, and I am the incoming president of the American Beach Property Owners Association. Very eager for Adrienne and Ennis to share this wonderful historical place with you this evening.
Thank you. Yeah, so due to the space, we're gonna like come in and out very dramatically as we take turns going through the presentation tonight. So I just wanted to, this picture here is Evans Rendezvous. How many of you are familiar with the Evans Rendezvous building or American Beach? Great. So some of this might be information you already know, but hopefully we'll get some new information in there for you. And then I put this picture in here because we've started playing with AI tools, and this is not a real picture. This is an AI generated picture, which I think is wild. And I asked AI to create an image of African Americans enjoying an evening out at a Chitlin Circuit venue in the 1950s. And that's what it came up with. And I just think that's crazy. It's so lifelike, it's scary. But anyway, so this is the building we'll be talking about this evening. And I'm just going to jump into a little bit of history, and then we'll get into the plans that have been going on with the community. So first I wanted to take a little bit higher level big picture lens of what the Chitlin Circuit was. And I don't know, is anyone familiar with the Chitlin Circuit? Maybe a few? Okay, great. Well, for those of you who aren't, the Chitlin Circuit was the, and Ennis, you're really good at describing it too, so if I don't, feel free to jump in. But basically it was the entertainment circuit that was present during Jim Crow era segregation that enabled African American entertainers to move around, especially in the South, but everywhere, performing at different venues. So it was the African American entertainment circuit, for to sum it up. And Evans Rendezvous was a stop on that circuit, and so you may have heard there were some famous performers who have been there, and that would have been in connection with this larger Chitlin circuit. And there was a real strong connection as well with Jacksonville and the La Villa neighborhood, where there were lots of entertainment venues, and musicians and entertainers would perform there, but then for the after party they would come up here to hang out at Evans, and that's some of what we've been told. Throughout tonight we might sprinkle in some information. Mr. Evans of the Rendezvous, who I'll talk about in a minute, his son lives in Jacksonville, and he's an amazing wealth of information about what happened there and things that went on. So he's the one who told us about that kind of after party thing. And so the Chitlin Circuit, I won't go into all the words on the slide here, but collective name given to a series of black-owned nightclubs, dance halls, juke joints, theaters, and other venues that were safe and acceptable for African American entertainers. The time frame was generally the 1930s to the 1970s. And if you're interested in learning more, we happened to work on a project last year that was a real joy, that did a deeper dive into what the Chitlin Circuit was in Florida in particular, and we looked at 4 different communities. And there is a website you can go to. It's a little tiny, but we can get you the info after if you're interested, but there's a whole report on the Florida Chitlin Circuit. So with that, we'll start talking about Evans Rendezvous. So it seems like most of you are familiar with where it is, which is great, but just as a little refresher, if you go into American Beach on Lewis Street, which is the main road that goes into the beach access, and you make a right on Gregg Street, it's not the 2-story white building, it's the building next to it, where the Star is. And then the actual historic park, which Ennis will talk about a little bit more, is it actually includes the vacant lots that are to the south and the west. And we'll talk about that later. So just a little bit about American Beach's history, very high level. Started in 1935, founded by members of the Afro-American Life Insurance Company that was headquartered in Jacksonville. Abraham Lincoln Lewis was one of the big movers and shakers, although it was a group of, I think, 7 men from the Afro who founded it. And it was where people, African Americans during segregation era Florida, could come and do you remember the phrase? Rest and
relaxation without humiliation.
Yeah, that was the phrase for American Beach, rest and relaxation without humiliation. So it was intended to be a getaway for employees of the Afro, but also a wide variety. So there were really high-end homes, but there were small homes, there were motels, apartments, that kind of thing. And Evans was really the center. So this area of Gregg and Lewis Streets, we'll talk about this later too, was known as the Crossroads, and it was kind of the commercial center of the neighborhood. And I have a quote that I don't want to forget from Marcia Feltz, which is really great. She says, and she's one of American Beach's great historians, she says, "To say Evans Rendezvous was the most frequented spot on American Beach understates its popularity and impact on this resort community, and it's remembered by visitors as the heartbeat and synergy of American Beach." It was ultimately at its peak 200-seat establishment. It was a restaurant, dining, dancing. It was open all hours of the night, and it was a very important venue. So how it came to be, let me just make sure, yeah, I'll move to this. How it came to be is this gentleman here, Mr. Willie Evans. He was originally from Georgia, and he served in the Civilian Conservation Corps in Folkestone, Georgia, as a cook. And so he got his career was centered around cooking and food. And he first came to American Beach around 1940 and started selling sandwiches, I believe his son told us. He started very small with selling sandwiches and refreshments. He bought a piece of property just to the north of Lewis Street that was actually adjacent to property owned by Abraham Lincoln Lewis. And he opened a place called Sunny's Spot, and that was for dining and dancing and food. And then World War II came, and Mr. Evans was drafted. So that's him in his military gear. When the war ended, he came back to American Beach around 1946 and returned to Sunny's Spot. But I guess Sunny's Spot was kind of a juke joint, lively, all hours of the night kind of place. Abraham Lincoln Lewis, I think, was pretty famously kind of a strict person and said, "Hey, how about I swap property with you and you go to this property that the Afro owns and we'll switch out." And so that's what they did. And so around 1948-ish, the first Evans opened, and that was this little building on the same property where it is now, from what we understand. But that was only open for a couple years. It was a small place, and by 1951, the building that we know now as Evans was there. And so you can see, you know, Duke Ellington was there. I don't know, do you know, Ennis, is that photo from the interior of the old one or the new one? It looks small.
That's the one that's now.
That's the one that's there now. So that was the bar. And you'll see some pictures of the interior now, what it looks like now. But yeah, and then these are just some pictures from later. So the restaurant was in operation until 1980. Well, it stayed in operation past that. They sold it in 1980, and it stayed open until 2000. And then it was closed. Okay, that is not Evans. That's what Ennis said. That was the pavilion that was The pavilion was here across Lewis Street at the beach access. But there was also, you can see in this picture, it's a little hard to tell. At some point, the Afro Life Insurance Company that owned the motel further south on Gregg Street built a hotel annex that was on this site. And Mr. Evans bought that in 1970. So there was a small motel there that you can see in that picture. Unfortunately, that was torn down, I think, in the early 2000s. But American Beach and Evans Rendezvous as part of it is included on the National Register of Historic Places. It was listed as a district in 2002. And unfortunately, after 2000, when it closed, it sort of sat vacant. And through a partnership with the Trust for Public Land and the state of Florida, through a Florida Communities Trust grant, I believe, and the county acquired the property. And so the county's had the property since about 2005. They did some initial repairs to shore it up. I think it got a new roof. They did some windows and doors, that type of thing. But since then, the property has just been waiting, and the community has been waiting, frankly. And so we were brought in through some planning efforts have been going on in earnest with the American Beach community since about 2018. And so this is just another step in that process, and that's what we'll talk about tonight. So yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you. One of the first things that I started working on when I came to the county was to work with Adrienne and Ennis on hosting community workshops in the American Beach neighborhood. So I'm going to get this slide. There we go. So we hosted 3 workshops. The dates are up here. If you can see that.
Cut off a little bit.
Oh, a little bit. So just, what is it? November, December, and January. So we've held 3 meetings at the American Beach Community Center. And all of the public's been welcome to attend. We've advertised that in the newspaper. We sent mail outs to American Beach residents. And we've had great attendance at those workshops. Each one was about 2 hours long. Plenty of time for feedback and communication. So in the first one, I believe, was in the newspaper. If y'all might have seen that in the Bernardina newsletter. So at the first meeting, it was really an open discussion about potential uses. I should mention there's approximately a $500,000 grant that the county has received, and it's been extended a couple times, but that is a pot of funds that can be used to rehabilitate the structure. As Adrienne was mentioning, some funds were used to shore up the structure, but the thought being that the Board of County Commissioners would want to know what the eventual use might be, so that when work was done on the structure, it didn't go in an opposing direction to what the thoughts and desires of the community were in terms of the eventual use of the property. So this was a discussion about potential use and components of the historic park space, including, from what Adrienne was showing you on the maps, the actual Evans Rendezvous building, the 2 lots to the south of the building, and then the 3 lots across on Gregg Street. So really it was an iterative process, whereas the first meeting was held, ideas were shared, and then at the second workshop, Adrienne and Ennis came back to have a narrowed down discussion of potential uses, and options were discussed, including cultural center, science centers, and options for those vacant lots. I do want to mention that there was a potential idea of a museum being there, so maybe the A.L. Lewis Museum moving closer, but that was sort of scratched because that'd be moving everything closer to the water, and that would put it at higher risk. So the museum folks really weren't interested in getting it closer to the shoreline. So the last meeting we held, which was just on January 27th, it presented conceptual plans for reuse of the Evans building and the vacant lots. And Adrienne will discuss those further, or maybe that one's Ennis, I believe. And as is mentioned here, all of the meetings included group discussion to ask questions and express concerns. And we do have those meetings recapped. Adrienne, yes, sir?
When you're talking about the buildings, is the building that looks, it's dilapidated, but it kind of looks like an ice cream store, or is that part of the?
That was been demolished. That was just that.
That must be one of the vacant ones.
No, it's like across Lewis and Ocean.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
So, what was this thing? Oh, so you can go to the county's website. We have an American Beach webpage, and there's also Evans Rendezvous. On either one, we have the meeting recap, the meeting notes that Adrienne's prepared that you can see. And we will have future meetings as well to talk about the crossroads, which is that Lewis and Ridge intersection, that will be discussed as well. So I think that was all I was going to mention for now. But yes, ideas were shared, you know, just in terms of what the community was interested in. There were thoughts about how much activity would be at the properties, and impacts that potentially of like litter and noise, more people, you know, things that we in the planning field really think about quite a lot. So let me, I think the next slide is for Ennis to discuss. Oh, no, it's not. I think I'm just skipping ahead. I think I read the slide before I saw it. So that is what I was thinking. Traffic, parking, and noise concerns. Active uses such as a playground and pavilion, like people that would come out to weddings. That wasn't so much what the community represented that they'd be interested in, but there's high interest in keeping green and open spaces, passive uses like gardens, labyrinths, heritage, and educational and interpretive signs. Also, a strong desire is to preserve the Black history and legacy of American Beach and sharing that story throughout the spaces. Which works out really well and dovetails nicely with the grant, is that the thought being that the floor plan of the Evans building would stay the same. So that would make that, and any needed modern improvements. We had our fire marshal go out and kind of look at it. There would definitely be improvements needed, you know, for a fire marshal. Another thought represented was that usage should serve the American Beach community. Programming and parameters around that are critical. It was mentioned that having a dedicated staff or director to manage all of the events that may happen there is essential. Some other concerns mentioned were losing open space, so kind of keeping those vacant lots as open space, and the view sheds associated with that is important. Water and drainage concerns, being so close to the coast, and then also a concern of the county listening to the community was represented. So since it's taken some time, and as you know, things in government work pretty slow, so there were some concerns represented about what will the county eventually do with this. And speaking from someone who's worked in government my entire life, I know that everything is a process and it takes a long time, especially the higher up in government you go. So working on a grant from like the state or the federal government, there's a lot of checkpoints and a lot of things that you have to do to maintain that. So all right, and now we have Ennis.
All right, let's make sure I don't block the camera. Can I stand here?
No, go that over there.
Okay, I don't want to block them either.
Camera can't see you.
Oh, okay, all right. All right, we'll make it work. We'll make it work. So now we're going to go over a little bit of the conceptual plans that came out of this interactive process that took a few months to get through. So one of the first things going back to November that had to be looked at is to frame what you can and can't do with the site. So you can kind of limit the discussion around the future to realistic items. And when this property was acquired, it became a part of what is known as the American Beach Historic Park. So that is Evans as well as lots that surround it, which you'll see in a minute. But it also is guided by a state management plan, which basically says what you can and can't do with the property. So if you think you can do a big full-blown commercial space, well, no, state management plan really doesn't say that. I won't read through all this, but some of the things that the state management plan did point out in terms of suggested uses that it could possibly use for included the inclusion of a beach pavilion, a dune boardwalk, interpretive facilities to tell the history of American Beach in that space. It could have a wildlife observation platform associated with the building, landscaping, really native landscaping more so than anything else, and supportive parking. I will say since that state management plan came out in 2005 or so, it's been a minute, there have been some things that have been completed. So the Dune Boardwalk, there is a boardwalk that actually goes over the dune that connects the building with the beach. It's been closed off from public access, but it is there. And then this pavilion you see in the middle of that dune boardwalk, within the plan, that is identified as a wildlife observation platform that would allow someone to see the habitat living within the dune. But that's off limits at this point too. But it's been completed. In addition, the management plan mentioned there were things that could be included in the building to generate revenue for its long-term maintenance and operations. Some of those items included potential food service and beach concession operations, and expanded interpretive area. So even though the museum isn't there, it doesn't necessarily mean all exhibits have to be special, that can't be destroyed. They may be things on the walls that show images and give information of what is there. So that's an example of expanded interpretive program area. And then it also could be possibly used for short-term special events such as meetings or lectures, or even what we're doing here tonight, as a way to generate potential revenue to support the restoration operations of the Evans. So this map kind of identifies what is the, can you see, let me just back up. This map basically shows what's considered the American Beach Historic Park. Evans, that building being identified as A to the north. The former hotel site being identified as B, and the hotel was demolished probably about 10 to 15 years ago. And then there's 3 lots across the street, which is, that's Gregg Street running north to south. Those 3 lots are also included in what's identified as American Beach Historic Park. So this talk around what to do at Evans really involves all 3 of those particular sites. So as was mentioned earlier, one of the big things that really came out, and it was very important for us in the beginning, because this whole process has been, there is a grant that can help rehabilitate the structure. The grant has a ticking time clock on it, and if you don't use the money, you will lose the money. So it's been extended a few times now. But before you can physically rehabilitate a structure, you need to know, what are you going to do? You know? I mean, HVAC systems, and restrooms, parking, all of these things change depending on what is the use. So that's what this process has been about. Going through this process, one of the big easy answers that came out of this was a dominant, rebuild it just like it is, leave the walls, everything the same, which makes it easy in terms of updating cost estimates, things of that nature. But what you see on this this slide, is basically the original footprint of Evans. And those uses are just what was originally there. There's a dance floor in the room to the north with the stage. There's a larger room on the south, which was really the dining room and restaurant area of Evans, and a big large bar. There was a package store, which is labeled the West Bar at one point. The kitchen just to the northwest, and then there's a service area behind the kitchen just to the north, and then an outdoor covered porch area overlooking the beach. So it's not to say those uses will stay the same inside, but those spaces, those shapes will stay essentially the same, as one of the things that came out of this effort. So this is just taking that same type of concept. Here's some images of the covered porch as well as the former restaurant bar space in Evans, so you can get an visual impression of what you can't see because the doors are locked. But in general, cleaning that up, restoring the building, and basically really having 2 large spaces that could then be programmed for a variety of events based off the feedback that was provided from the community and those who attended. So these are AI generated images. But based off the conversations, there was really a stronger element around programming within this space, more so than we want to change or add a facility to the site. What are the type of programs that you want to see take place in the space? We then took that list of programs and ideas that came out of the meetings and threw them into this AI generator, and it spit out what these things could possibly do. So community dinners, space for artists and writers, as well as spaces for lectures and events were some of the ideas that popped up, and these are representative of what that could possibly be. Additional ideas were using the walls for history exhibits, and we can see that all in the space that we're in today, as well as small music events possibly, and multi-purpose spaces. So in terms of multi-purpose spaces, one idea that did come up was partnering with local or state colleges to use this space where students can come in and actually study things like sea level rise, the local environment, which is a very different aspect or a very different scene if you were sitting on UF's campus or Florida A&M's campus, for example. Then we looked at what to do with the lots surrounding Evans. It was strongly recommended that while making it active, also creating a space that fit within the context of that surrounding environment, and then building off the natural environment there. So this slide basically shows other park spaces, open spaces within this general climate that feature things like native landscaping or footpaths that are actually ADA accessible, so not just out in the dune, historic markers, or even the idea of sculptures that are representative of leaders from the past, in the neighbor's past. Oh, let's go back. And then as I get towards the end of this, so then we took all that information, basically laid those things out in a way that could graphically kind of represent the information that was coming from the community. This is not to say this is the exact plan. This is just the information came out. Here's how it could possibly look, and let's generate feedback from that. So this basically shows, let's see, okay, so we have Evans here showing the building being basically rehabilitated with existing footprint. Yet we do know with the restrooms and the service court is most likely that's going to have to be upgraded to be ADA accessible. So there may be some new construction for service areas, for example. But then the lots themselves forming a way to really reconnect the beach dune with Nana across the street, well, across two streets, Ocean and Greg, and maybe even having like a pedestrian promenade, a path that takes you through a landscape park area that's really featuring native landscaping there, and really over time allowing those two dune systems to naturally start to reconnect. And then having a little bit of support and parking for visitors in the space. So these next few slides just show the same images just blowing up so you can see them a little better. This shows the 3 lots across the street from Evans. But again, a pedestrian path kind of connecting both dune systems together, supportive parking, native landscaping, and maybe even having like sculptural elements. Take the beach lady, for example, and having a sculpture, a silhouette or something to pay homage to all the work that she did within the community. And then this just shows the rendering on the east side, so the east side of Gregg Street, basically showing an extension of that pedestrian promenade, but maybe having it link into the covered porch and the dune boardwalk that no one has access to right now. And then having a way to actually have a footpath that connect you from the community back to the ocean. So this is also AI generated. And all this says is we're going to take those things that people have mentioned in the meetings, throw them into this AI generated thing, and let's see what that makes it look like. ability to use of Photoshop, we can crop that and show an actual before and after what that could look like. So those are the lots across the street from Evans, looking back towards the Nana Dune. And this, if there was a footpath with a native landscape, and that might be kind of what that looks. You go from that to that. So our next steps. Okay, I'll make sure I'm doing next steps. So next steps, we are in the process of wrapping up this Evans conversation. So what we're going to be doing this month, we're in the process of updating cost estimates for the county. And the hope is that we can now facilitate the use of those grant funds to rehabilitate the building, later this year, hopefully. Implementation for state grant for real estate. Yep. So we're in the process of working with the county now on the implementation of that state grant for rehabilitation. In addition, we're going to begin another community engagement process around the larger area around Evans. So as Adrienne mentioned earlier, historically the intersection of Lewis and Gregg Streets was known as the Crossroads. And so there's been a lot of contention and discussion around what should the future of that area be, which is kind of where the beach access to driving is at. So we're going to be working with the community there to try to come to some type of consensus about, from an infrastructure perspective, from a planning perspective, about what the county needs to do to finally move forward with a resolution in that particular area. And let's see, what else? We got to look over here. Also, some questions and things that have also been popped up really revolve more around the program and the implementation of the building once it's rehabilitated. So that's going to be, I think, an ongoing conversation about how is that staffed and how is the structure operated once rehabilitation is completed. But in terms of purposes for the physical structure itself, we're getting to a resolution to try to move that forward. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dawkins, who's going to talk about the American Beach Property Owners Association.
Thank you again for allowing us to be here. American Beach is home to me now. I'm a Cajun girl. I'm from South Louisiana. So now I'm a Floridian, and I love it. The weather's not as humid, so it's better. But what was important to the homeowners, and what is important to Amelia Island, I think, is preserving what that community means to not only American Beach, but to Amelia Island as itself. And you know the history, if you're all patrons of the museum here, you know that a lot of freed slaves came here to this area during the Civil War. A lot of them settled here after the Civil War. A lot of them worked in this area after the Civil War. And it was a perfect place for Afro-American insurance company to buy land, to welcome people in a social, fun environment to be at American Beach. And that's what this is about. One thing that is unique about this resort area, even in its heyday in the 1930s, they welcomed people from all ecological, economical, and social status in the black community. There were a lot of people who were very rich, very affluent, but there were also people who saved up all year to come here, or saved up for 4 or 5 years to come here. There were a lot of boarding houses along American Beach, and that has continued today. And a lot of the deterioration of American Beach happened with Hurricane Dora. I don't know how many people are from this area, but it destroyed it. But a lot of those folks who owned those properties, who were dependent upon the vacationers, just couldn't afford to keep it up. They didn't have insurance, and in fact, a lot of insurance companies wouldn't insure black-owned properties. So, that's what was important about the Afro-American insurance company. So, it was a place of refuge, but more than anything, it was a place of fun. It was a respite. It was a place where, they could be themselves, right? And so that is what we want to preserve. If you go, how many of you have been to American Beach in the last 3 years? Is it the same place that it was 5 years ago? No. There are houses going up all over. You know, they're putting in water and sewer now, and so they're going to be bigger houses. I have a bigger house. I do admit that, but you know, it's not going to be the same. And that's why it is so important that we hold on to the pieces of this heritage that we still have, so that people don't forget what it meant to them, to those in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s, and 70s, but what it means to us now. You know, my grandchildren come to the beach, and it's just so fun telling them the stories that I've heard. You know, the family owned property there when the beach lady was there. And if you ever met her, you walk on the beach, she would just talk to you. She'd tell you whatever you wanted to know. And she single-handedly saved this area. I mean, saved it from, you know, just becoming an Omni plantation or another Ritz. I mean, she just really saved it single-handedly. And that's what the community wants to do. That's what the property owners wants to do. And we are very encouraged by the work that Adrienne and Ennis are doing, that the work the county is doing. And in the last commissioners meeting, Commissioner Farmer said, we don't want to do anything that the property owners don't want us to do. And I just can't tell you what that meant to us. And it's recorded so you can hear it. So he said it because, you know, it is our home. It is our place. And, you know, even though my parents never went there, it's a home for them too. So if you have any questions about how we feel, how it feels to live there, just want to answer those to you. But that is what we want. We just want to preserve a little bit of what it was in its heyday. Oh, I have a slide? Oh, okay. It's what I just said. So, that just goes to show you, I didn't need a slide. I told Adrienne, I said, I don't need a slide. You know, lawyers talk and they don't know what they say half the time anyway. But we just talk. So, do y'all have any questions, you know, from a homeowner's perspective? Because we want this, yes.
They're talking about the previous commercial at the crossroads. How do you see that integrating with the current larger homes? And probably what comes with that, of gated community, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, that's a sticky subject, and we haven't started those conversations. But the four corners of Lewis and Gregg Street, 3 of those are still commercial, but 1 is residential, and there's a very large house on beachfront side, on the north side of Lewis Street at that area. Who asked the question about the little ice cream? What do you call it? So that was torn down, and that was rezoned as residential last year, actually. So, and we know and it's right across the street from my house. So I know the people, they're going to build a house there as well. So the community now is a residential community. Almost half of the houses, people are full-time residents. It's a lot more than it used to be, and I think people like me who want to retire here, we're seeing more and more of those folks building the houses that are going up now, and they're coming to retire in the area. And as they said, and as Adrienne and Ennis said, you know, we don't want the music to go on until 2 o'clock in the morning. The guy on the corner of Lewis Street, talked to him the other day, he said, well, you know, I don't want to wake up to food, you know, to just smelling food or alcohol. And so it's a residential area and people live there full time. So there are mixed feelings about what needs to go there and how it needs to be developed. So
You should stick to ice cream then.
So it's a difficult place because most of the people who are buying are building residential houses, and they're building multi-million-dollar residential houses there. And so that's why the route that Adrienne and Ennis are taking, presenting to the county, of something that is education, cultural, and enrichment center, is very in line with what we want to do in preserving what was there in the past. But the conversations start March 23rd. So if you want to come to the center, please come and hear the conversation. But honestly, there are mixed feelings. There are folks who, in American Beach, who don't want it to be a big bustling commercial area, but they want some limited commercial presence there. And there are others who believe it should be all residential.
How many sites are in the association?
Right
How many
now,
lots, how many, no,
there are 188 lots. Several people own multiple lots. I mean, there are houses that own some own 3 lots, actually. There are 147 lots that were improved. Because there were some lots that were never, they were owned by people, but they were never improved. But of the 188, there were 147 that weren't improved right now. And active, with habitable residents right now, they're probably about 116. So.
If this is a historic area, how do you get by with building these multi-building, and changing zonings and stuff like that? I thought if it's a historic area, it would have, and if you want to keep it as historic, these multi-million-dollar homes are not going to do that. You're going to lose the whole character of American Beach.
Well, that's interesting that you would say that, because a lot of people feel that way, but at the same time, it was founded as a resort. And if you look at some of the old pictures, some of those houses were pretty elaborate for those times. As I said, part of the enrichment, the value of that community is you had millionaires that lived there. And then you had people that were manning the ice cream shops or working behind the bar at Evans Rendezvous, and they lived there at their time. So it was always meant to be a multi-dimensional kind of one of the mixed-use communities. So it was always meant to be that. So
I was just going to jump in from a planning and land use and zoning perspective. I mentioned that the neighborhood is on the National Register of Historic Places as a historic district, but it's not a local historic district by county ordinance. And so a lot of times people think, oh, well, it's on the National Register, that means it's protected and you can't do anything. That's not true. You could bulldoze an entire National Register district. You just don't get that honorary designation anymore. But the actual teeth for protecting historic structures is at the local level through an ordinance. Like Fernandina Beach has local historic districts, but this is not, the county doesn't have a mechanism for creating those, so it is not a local historic. So there's no demolition review. There's the only things that apply are land use and zoning, and the community, back when I worked with the county before, there were some tweaks made to the zoning to help try to protect the neighborhood a little bit more, but yeah, it's not a protected historic district in that way.
So the zoning has nothing, you can change zoning?
Yes.
And the size of lots and everything?
Yeah, well, one of the...
No, not the size of
No,
lots.
that was one of the changes that was made, was actually to limit how many lots you could combine
Right.
in order to avoid people buying like 7 lots and making an enormous house. So that has changed.
That has, and actually now there are 3 houses there that are on 3 lots, but they were there built
Before.
in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Now you can only build on 2 lots. And the other lot, if you have 3 lots, you can sell it, but it has to remain vacant or naturally preserved, but you can only build on 2 lots. And there's also square footage limitations and height limitations on there as well.
What about the motel?
That's still there, as it was in the 1950s, 40s. When was it built? 40s, 50s?
40s, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still operating?
What's the socioeconomic mix going to be? The more, mega mansions you get, the fewer ice cream stand operators are going to be able to live there.
That is part of what we want to do, and I'll go to the water and sewer that's going in right now. The county helped us get a READY grant to help the inhabitants of American Beach connect without paying. So they're paying $6,700 for each septic tank to be moved to sewer. And so we're doing things like that looking at grants to help the residents in the smaller, to keep those. And so we're also looking at community efforts to improve properties, to raise money to improve those properties so they can keep them there. The danger is the tax base. Can people, as the property values continue to rise, can people continue to pay the property taxes? Even if they're homestead, you know, we have individuals working there that are on Social Security that have been on Social Security for 35 years or more. And they're living on less than $1,000 a month. So you think about that. If you're paying property taxes and you're living on that, that's very, very difficult. So we're very cognizant of the difficulty for doing that, and that's why we're encouraging it. Well, I'll tell you, when we built my house, we went through to try to preserve the property that was there, the structure that was there. It was only a 750-foot structure that was there. And they tell me it used to be an ice house. So it would have been great if we get it, but they wouldn't let us keep it and preserve it. But there are a lot of property owners who are making the effort and expending the money to keep the structures and reinforcing and remodeling those existing structures. So we're encouraging that where it can be. But you know, it is a concern as those values go up, how people can afford to remain in the area.
Can you say a little bit about the motel, you know, as you walk south?
Yeah.
Was that intended to house people who are visiting?
Yes, it functions, and Ennis can answer that too, but it functions as a hotel. And he still did it now. Actually, I think it's vacant right now. I think he's doing some remodeling or something. He won't say what's going on. But people were renting that. They were living there. That was their full-time residence. They were renting it as an apartment. But he also used it as a hotel too. People could rent a room there for the weekend or the night.
So did he develop that?
No.
It was A.L.
Yeah, A.L. Lewis owned it. You know, I think you talked about how they swapped.
Okay.
You know, the hotel was part of the Evans Rendezvous land. You can explain that better than me.
Yes, yeah, so the hotel was constructed by A.L. Lewis, the person who basically developed American Beach. It was a Green Book site, so it was one of the, I guess it may be the last Green Book site that's still
Operational.
Well, still existing, because Evans was never listed in the Green Book. So, but yeah, A.L. Lewis constructed it back in the late 1940s. It's always been, a hotel, but that was really, if you look at the phasing of American Beach, that was really the third phase of American Beach. The first two phases were primarily north of Lewis Street.
So there are flowers in some of the windows as you walk down.
Yeah, people were living there.
People were living.
People were living there. That was there was their apartment. They rented it.
Are now living there. Kind of settles that.
Huh? Excuse me?
They're now living there.
Yeah. And he did have some vacant places where you could function as a hotel, as I said, and rent it for the weekend or the week if you wanted to stay at American Beach. So it's operational.
I was just going to mention one of the stories that Willie Evans Jr. shared with us was that the hotel building that was next to Evans, that he and his dad and his family lived there, like in the 70s, I guess that would have been. But during the busy season, which was it was still relatively busy in the 70s, they lived in one of the units in that hotel. Yeah. So they were right there all the time, but it was, and then they rented the rest of the rooms for visitors. So that was still an active hotel up through the time that Evans owned it.
I have a question, I'm not sure who it should address.
I'll get out of the way.
Yeah,
There you go.
we can take turns.
My question is once you decide on what you're gonna do with the rendezvous, you're gonna be responsible for maintaining that, and how are you gonna generate that income to be able to maintain that whole complex?
Yeah, so that
Is
was,
that being addressed by this group?
yes, so, and I'll let Janyce talk about that too, from the property owner's perspective, but yeah, that was one of the questions that came up, was this obviously is gonna need some self-sustaining revenue, and I think that's what they intended when they did that state management plan, to allow for some like, limited options for revenue generation. The county, and I don't know how many of you pay attention to county politics and what goes on in the county, but the Parks and Recreation section, which is kind of in charge of dealing with this site, the county did not have like a full Parks and Rec department until a few years ago. They just hired their first Parks and Rec director in the last few years. And so that's a brand new, previously the department existed, but it was really just maintenance of existing facilities. So that's very new. So that is a big question. And one of the questions from the community was, can the county say at this time if they're committed to funding, ongoing operations? And the county was like, we don't know yet. But I will say that's the property owners and also the nonprofit organization Friends of American Beach are really committed, from what I've heard, and if you want to jump into that with fundraising.
One of our big concerns was to ensure that this was going to be something that would be sustained, that it's not something that's temporary, and in 10 years it's going to be abandoned again, and there's going to be a fight, someone wants to tear it down. So that is very, very important, that it be self-sustaining, so we can maintain it.
Yeah, and that was a big concern too. That's why the staffing issue came up so much as well, because it really, what we heard from the community was that they really want to see it utilized as a cultural center, an educational center, but that's only feasible to the point you have someone in charge of programming that and managing that, and so otherwise it's just going to sit empty. And so that, a staff position is a big question for the county, because that's something that they really should be funding, in my opinion. So yeah, those are some big questions.
So there's no chance it could be restored to its former function?
No, it could not be. Under the current state management plan that exists, no. And the state still reviews that, like it's still subject to that state management plan, and that's not an allowable use. And the community, I do not think would support that either. We did not do that.
It could not be, part of it be a restaurant during the day or something like that?
That's not allowed under the plan. You can have, the state management plan only allows basically like limited concessions. So you could have like an ice cream, you could sell ice cream or water or sunscreen or, but yeah, you can't have a full-blown restaurant or anything like that. You could sell food, but not like a full-blown restaurant
Maybe
operation.
more like what you see at Fort Clinch.
Yeah.
You go in there and there's a little gift shop and you can
Yeah.
buy like some frozen treats.
That would probably be allowed. But that state management plan is still reviewed by staff at the Florida Communities Trust in Tallahassee, and any changes that would want to be made to that plan have to be approved by the state. So that is a real limitation on what can be done. But I will say, everything we've heard from the community, I think that's like the maximum level of that kind of activity the community wants to see anyway. So it works out that way.
Question, when you say the community, what do you mean?
That's a good question. It's a great question. And I don't know if Janyce, if you want to answer that.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So the question was, when we keep saying community, what does that mean?
The American Beach community.
Yeah.
Which is?
Which is the people that live within that 188 lot
Lots.
area. It is, Summer Beach on one end and the Omni on the other end, and it's right in the middle. So it's Verney Park.
Yeah.
And Julia Street is on either side.
Up to 200?
Excuse me?
Up to 200?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I will say, we of course, because they're county meetings, they were advertised to the public, and anyone can come and offer comments if they wanted to. But it's like the commissioners said, we presented this to the commission on Monday. They said, what the community, the neighbors want is really the most priority. However, I'll say, there are people who don't live there anymore who still are engaged in the process. and who, maybe lived there a long time ago or had family who vacationed there, they still provide feedback. They're on the email list. Like Mr. Evans doesn't live in Fernandina anymore, but his sister does, and they still participated and attend when they can, and so that, they're still kind of like legacy members of the
There's
community.
folks in Europe who are interested about Evans,
And yeah, people,
creating all kinds of.
yeah, the history is so
history of
amazing.
music,
Yeah,
recording artists,
yeah,
performed there.
yeah. But for purposes of when the commission says we want to know what the community wants, it's generally the immediate,
The people who live there.
yeah, that's
All
generally.
right.
Understanding that it is a county resource, so
Yeah.
someone who lives in Callahan could come and.
Yes.
I mean, they're-
Oh,
All of the
absolutely.
programming.
American Beach Community Center can be rented out by anyone, in the county. It's definitely held in trust for the entire county.
If we have no more questions, I'd like to take a moment to thank our presenters. And as you're on your way out, if you'd like to score some points with the museum, I'd ask you all gently maybe to lift your seat and
Do you want
place it out by our elevators so that we don't have to go all the way down.
And I have membership packets right here, waiting for you. Thank you, very well done.
I'm glad you got that. Yes.